Welcome to the Winter Symposium for the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences on remote and online teaching, on-campus teaching during the pandemic. With no further ado, let me introduce our fearless and fabulous Dean, Keith Molenaar. Keith, would you say a few words to open us up?
I would be happy to, William. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending and your continuous commitment to excellence. I remember in May when I asked if I could have a few volunteers to work on how we go to remote teaching for the fall, and was just overwhelmed at the enthusiasm, number of volunteers we got, and just the quality of what you all came up with over the summer. So to continue and move us into the spring, which is thrilling. I think we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. William and the group, everyone here decided to pull this together. I think it's just an excellent idea. We have so many quality faculty members here who all bring something different to the way we can improve our teaching and continue to move forward. I think this forum that's been set up where you all will get a chance to participate and work together and learn from each other is going to be really, really good. So I don't want to hold anything up. I just, again, really wanted to thank you. I share William's enthusiasm as well for the spring semester, and the starter's gun is about to go off, and I appreciate you all getting in for this warm-up session, if you will, and really move it forward. So William, anything else you'd like me to cover, or are you ready to launch?
Thank you, Keith. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for launching us. And thank you, too, for constituting the group behind this. I affectionately refer to the group as Group 5 because it was the 5th group on Keith's list of volunteers. And what I'm so delighted to say is that group has held together over the course of the semester. We have a group of about 12 to 15 core faculty who've really stuck with it. And I want to thank them tremendously. I want to thank the whole group, but I want to thank Jem, Chris, Rhonda, Alfonso for really putting together this winter symposium, for putting together the variety of surveys, and for stepping up and keeping the conversation going. Thank you. I want to thank you all, everyone on this call. People are entering. We have a great turnout. I want to thank everyone for joining us. This is the starting bell, and I am humbled to be part of this college. I've joined the college only for a year now, and I am so impressed by the commitment, the vision, the grit, and the quality of the instructors in this college. It's fantastic. It's meant a lot to me. So I want to keep us moving. In fact, my significant job today is really as timekeeper. But I want to open by saying what we're going to do and setting out what I see as the fundamental issue that we need to address. So forgive me here. I'm going to move into sharing screen for a second and see if I can get this going. You know, I was doing it all the time with my own class, and let's get going here. So here is our agenda, and happily we're already a little ahead of time, so I'm going to keep us moving quite along by setting out what our agenda is. And what we want to do today is have a few presentations. Jem and Rhonda are going to say a few things. I'll say a few things to start us off. Then we're going to introduce 4 speakers. Each of them will have 5 minutes to talk about a topic: engagement, project-based learning, resilience, and then kind of general sense of student interaction. We're then going to break into breakout sessions. Now, breakout sessions in Zoom, as we all know, can be tricky. I am going to open up the 4 breakout rooms, and I'm going to let people choose their breakout room. I'll have a slide that I'll bring back when we get to that point in the presentation. And if you can't choose, if you have trouble choosing, I'm happy to hang around a little bit and insert you into a breakout room. If there's a problem with Zoom about which update you have, if you can't choose, and you should be able to choose, you can always hover over your name in the participants section and change the name of the breakout session you want. That said, the breakout sessions are going to be about conversation, and that's the most important part of today. Really, group 5 and this group, no one owns teaching. Even master teachers know that they don't own teachers. We now have a room full of 60 odd people, each of whom are excellent teachers. So the breakout rooms are really the core of today. It's a chance for us to talk as teachers about what we've learned and where we're going. So on that note, I want to shift to what I see as the most important issue confronting us. In a way, what I feel like I've learned and where I think my energy is sitting. And I guess I want to open by telling you my thesis. And my thesis is this. Last 2 semesters tested us in a way, at least I've never been tested before. I taught during Katrina in the South, and that was nothing compared to this, because this is a long-term test. This is the long distance run. And that in itself contains all kinds of challenges. But to the best of my knowledge, we were victorious last semester. We have not lost more students, a spectacular amount of students than our normal attrition rates. Indeed, the problems we faced last semester, in a way, they emphasize problems that we know, problems of resilience, problems of stress, problems of students overwhelmed. They emphasize them and they put a point on them. They made us focus on how we get students through. In a word, they made us focus on engagement. And my belief is we were successful then, we can be successful in the future, and we can come out of this crisis better teachers. So let me back up and show you some slides for a few minutes, but let me just say, we can engage our students, we can overcome this problem, and we can learn to teach better than we have in the past. We can excel ourselves and grow as teachers. And that to me is a fantastic challenge. So though this is a tremendously ambivalent period, there is much good in it. And we can rise up and find in ourselves new abilities, new strengths, new ways of engaging students. So that said, this semester, Group 5 did a mid-semester survey of students. And the survey revealed that most students were doing okay, some were doing well, and some were doing not so well. And I sat with this data a lot. For a long time, it had me actually and honestly quite depressed, because many of the students, they commented in their comments very human problems. And what I learned from that survey, it intersected with what I was seeing in my own class. I assigned a project where students had to make cartoons. And the cartoons became very personal. I want to share with you this one by Liz, No More, spelled incorrectly in the title there, sorry. But what is so incredible about this cartoon is the desperate sense of being overwhelmed. All these voices. Yesterday there was a shooting. A peaceful protest turned violent. Climate change causing massive flooding. Disturbing video shows attack on innocent. And it goes on, and the student can say no more in red, but really she's crippled by the weight of the pressure. This to me summed up what I saw in the survey, that the students, in the end, they were complaining and venting about many of the things, many of these voices. But what they were saying was that they appreciated what the faculty were doing, but they were disappointed in their own ability to continue. Each of the survey comments I read echoed this sense of the student folding in on itself. It was heartbreaking. And in that, I'm brought to another cartoon, this one by Hannah, called Control. And the cartoon is amazing for its skill in illustration, and for its ironic, profoundly ironic title or text. Maybe this year I'll be in control. So Hannah is reflecting, right, that she wants to be in control this semester. She wants to do better this semester, but she is showered in the COVID virus, indeed crowned by it. And she's looking up. Is she looking up at the COVID? Is she looking up at some greater power? She's a strong figure. Look at those cheekbones, the angles of her face. She's strong, but at the same time, there's this tremendous overriding irony that control is not going to get her through that rain of overwhelming viral entities. To me, this is a little poem. It's a little poem about the impossibility of control. But also in it is the beauty of imperfection. I look there, you can see on the left side is a little bit of whiteout where Hannah's corrected some little mistake in her drawing. We wouldn't even perceive it as a mistake, but she made a little touch up there. And there's just beauty in the humanness of it. It's a poem about, similar to Liz's poem, it's a poem about the situation is overwhelming, but there's also a wonderful strength here. And that strength, I don't think is so much about control. It's about some human spirit. So the group also did a faculty survey. And that faculty survey, I think it showed that the faculty were doing pretty well. Many of them okay, and some of them, like the students, not so well. And I sat with this survey a bit, and I don't have time to bring you through the many, many strong responses, but I want to focus on one as I wrap up. This was a really eloquent statement. I don't know who wrote it, maybe someone here, really eloquent. It's been so hard to foster a sense of community among students. And I think that that negatively impacts both their learning and mental health. As one example, we face a strange equilibrium where individual students would rather not share their video, but the class as a whole would have a better experience if everyone did. So I want us to think about this because I think, I want us to think about this sense of a strange equilibrium, because I think that sums up the problem we are facing. We are faced with this equilibrium of desperation and strength. And one choice in there that's logical is to try and control it, try and control that equilibrium, try and control those human relationships. I want us to think about that today, about the limits of control and about how to navigate through this strange equilibrium, this need to engage students who want to be engaged, but also turn away. Because I think that if we can balance that equilibrium, we can do exceptional work that will lead us through not just this semester, but the future of teaching. So with that, I'm at my 10-minute mark, and I want to turn us now to Jem, who's going to talk about student engagement overall. Thank you. Onwards, Jem.
Thank you, William. That That was certainly an engaging opening, and I'm not sure I can follow it with excitement, but that's what I'm here for. So I'm going to start by saying something that I'm sure all of you already know, but needs to be said when starting a discussion about engaging learners. And that is that engagement in a remote learning environment is very different from engagement in a physical classroom. And to expand on that just a little bit, engagement in a remote learning environment is different than, or teaching is different than teaching in an online MOOC kind of course. Our students here at CU did not sign up for an online experience. And when I began this teaching journey, which by the way was only 10 months ago, I heard all of the rumors about students taking a gap year or considering it, and I wondered a lot how I was going to make their experience or their expensive education worth it and different from a for-profit correspondence school. And at that time, I said to myself, well, expertise, of course, but expertise, with a few exceptions in some very specialized areas, expertise is available in most subjects everywhere, not only in those correspondence type schools, but on YouTube. So I kept asking myself, what can they get from me? And my hope is that they can get inspiration. And the best part of this transition for me to remote teaching is that it made me ask these questions again. Because I know a lot of us say, oh, we're always reevaluating and tweaking and looking at what we're doing in teaching. But honestly, I've been teaching a long time and I don't think about those things as much as I should. So engagement comes from many places. Engaging material can sometimes stand up on its own. And related to that, students having the sense that the instructor is engaged with it as well. And then on a different plane, there's personality and maybe even showmanship. And this is what took the biggest hit for me when moving online, because I'm a very sort of physical, in your face, wildly gesticulating person who sometimes is standing on the table in the classroom. And so I really had to stop and think about what engagement means to me. And is it participation? Is it active learning? Could it even be entertainment? I mean, it could be all of these, some of these, none of these are bad. And in the last 10 months, the number one thing that I hear from students is that they feel isolated. And as William says, lack a sense of community. And if I was going to do only one thing to make remote learning better, it would be to actively address this. Because this is what they're not going to get from YouTube or from a correspondence school. There is no more organic grouping of people who are talking before your class starts or out in the hallway when they can't get in because the previous instructor is going over. And unless you actively make some time to do this, I found that there's not even the organic talking between me and my students when I'm waiting for class to start. Just click in when your Zoom session starts. So there is a real paradigm shift when moving to remote learning. When we teach in a classroom, everything is very instructor-centric. And in the remote setting, I feel like everything is very LMS, learning management system, Canvas, if you will, centric. And in my opinion, online course engagement relies a lot more heavily on course design. And honestly, that's not something I put a lot of thought into in the past. I think I did good courses, but I like to keep them very organic and off the cuff and extemporaneous. So I have become a better teacher during this time because I have really laid out things in modules and I'm putting a lot more thought into my class. So before, I believe that our role is to be the expert in the room and a mentor. But now it's the expert, to be the mentor, to be a designer, a manager, and most importantly, or most differently, because you might already be all those things, a facilitator. And two of the things that need facilitating specifically is clear guidance on how to navigate your course and active efforts to form a community. So I personally feel like even with live lectures over Zoom, the default, unless you go the extra mile, is that classes become a passive activity, much like watching television, and it's no longer a multi-sensory environment. Or maybe the problem is that it is because they're in their home and you're competing for their attention. So for me, it's not even a multimedia environment because I originally thought that was going to be a great perk of remote teaching. And the reason it hasn't been for me is that Zoom has not been reliably smooth enough for me to switch mediums. And, you know, I'm afraid to turn off my screen sharing because I won't get it back on during that lecture. So it hasn't been as smooth for me as I thought in terms of advantages of technology. And as instructors, we have to think about our own engagement as well, because we're certainly missing that dynamic energy of a classroom. So a lot of the talk I've heard in the last 10 months about engagement has revolved around using polls and other widgets to force the students to check in. But I probably will do this, but I don't really think of that as engagement. That is forcing the students to check in. They don't want to be there. They don't naturally want that from their own soul, right? So something I've learned over the last several months, and also by talking to other experts, that I am not an expert, is that instructors need to be very intentional when putting new digital resources in a course. I originally thought the flipped classroom was going to be the solution. Wow, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get all the information out ahead of time, and then I can use my lecture time to problem solve and work examples. Students always like that, right? But there's two problems with this, and one is that it's more burdensome for students. You're essentially asking them for more contact hours. And the second is if they don't keep up in approximate real time, they're not going to get anything out of those in-class discussions. So I've decided not to go with a flipped approach, but to give many supplemental materials this semester. And here are some specific things that I am definitely planning on doing. So the first is maintaining a really well-organized, thoughtfully designed and easy to navigate Canvas page, because this is the course space right now. There's no physical space. Some of you maybe already did this, but I did not, and this is really making my teaching better. An important second thing is checking in periodically with my students to let them know that I see them. So far, I've had relatively small classes, and I have a much larger class this semester, but I've already set up sign-up sheets where I'm going to meet with 10 to 15 people for 15 minutes every once in a while, and just talk to them about non-class things, and also ways to facilitate their interaction, even if it's not with me. So multiple surveys throughout the semester is something I want to do to get feedback and figure out what's working and what's not working. And I think that really successful online instructors that I want to emulate do a lot of real-time tweaking as opposed to just reflection at the end of the semester. And hopefully I, and you, if you do it, will do good things with this information from surveys. But just the act of asking them is going to go a long way towards, I think, creating an environment where people feel seen and heard and cared about. But if you do act on the feedback, I think it's going to be amazing, because you're giving them a role in course design and real-time changes. And that is something that definitely separates us from MOOCs, and the role in course design, I think, is really key for engagement. So we don't have a lot of time to make a lot of video content. I know we're all very busy, but I'm going to be moving more towards short, 30-second, think TikTok, unpolished video snippets to give homework hints, things like that. When you assign something in class, you usually say something. You say, oh, there's 5 problems, but I'm not going to cover this part until Friday, so don't worry about it yet, and don't fall into this trap. And a lot of that, I think, goes missing when you just post something online. So I know I'm running out of time, but for facilitating community, I definitely am going to be setting up a Slack workspace. A lot of my students did that on their own last semester, a place where they can communicate. And I'm going to try a service called VoiceThread, which you may already have used, but I just discovered it a few days ago. And you can check it out at voicethread.com, but it describes itself as a living discussion space. And as I said, I'm not an expert in it yet, but I'm really impressed with what I've learned about it as a multi-sensory environment and collaboration space. And CU has a license for it. So if you think you want to use it, you don't have to subscribe. And so I'm going to be doing a lot of experimenting with voice space this week. And I guess two more things I could say in 30 seconds. So I can see from my class role that I have some students that I have had before, and I'm going to be using them as stooges in my magic show. I'm going to be asking them to actively seed forums and get the conversation going. And I think they're going to be really good at that. But to close, I just want to say that engagement is not necessarily synonymous with participation. It doesn't have to involve projects, groups, and active learning. The quiet ones in your class are very often engaged, and you don't even know it that you're sparking something inside of them that you hear about years later when they come back and ask you for a letter or tell you about their lives. And so I do want to stay really mindful of social anxiety and forcing people like forcing things like living discussion spaces on people. And I'm even going to allow them to ask questions and have anonymous avatars, which is not the greatest for building community, but I think is going to bring more people out of the woodwork that otherwise wouldn't have chimed in class. So I'm going to always remember that I'm not there to give students information alone, but that I'm moving them through a progression of learning and cohesiveness with clear goals. And that said, there are a lot of digital resources out there that can do that as well, but what I can do differently is listen to them in real time and adapt my approaches in real time, not just a reflection at the end of the semester. So I wish you all a successful and rewarding spring semester, and I am really looking forward in this symposium to hearing about some of your ideas, and thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jem. Engagement and teaching as a progression of listening to community. Excellent. Let's turn to Rhonda. Rhonda,
Yes, hello.
Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I have some slides here that I'm going to share. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
All right. See if I can start. All right. So I want to just start out by saying that, I love to talk about teaching. I think any day where we get to talk about teaching is a good day. And what I'm hoping to do today is just kind of share some experiences that I had last semester in the hopes of sparking conversation. And if anybody hears something in what I did that they want to talk about or that kind of solves a problem that you've been thinking about, then I'll consider this a success. So just to start, going into last semester, I was just really apprehensive about what was going to happen. I mean, there was so much uncertainty, there's so much going on. And I kind of felt like I was going into battle. It was like, oh my God, we're going into COVID. We're going to teach this semester. What is it going to be like? And, the class that I was teaching was this freshman, it's an accelerated freshman class where we take the entire first year CS curriculum and we smush it into one semester. Okay, so it's a challenging class. I had about 35 students. They're extremely motivated because they have to test into the class. They have to choose to take this class, but they are also still freshmen, right? So they're motivated, but they're still freshmen. The class was offered as a hybrid, so it was an in-person. At the beginning of the semester, it was more in person, but as the semester went on and students were leaving campus, it became a little bit more remote. So I was having in-person and remote lectures and recitation. Okay, so I started extremely apprehensive. By the end of the semester, I would say that I consider the class a success, right? I got through the semester and I was like, look back over it and I thought, wow, that actually went pretty well. And so I have a couple of sort of high-level messages, which is, remote doesn't have to be awful. We can get through the semester. Students can still learn and we can still expect them to learn, right? Like we can be successful at this. All right, so what I want to talk about then is what did I do and why do I think this semester was a success? All right, so coming back to last summer, thinking about going into the fall, my problem statement then was, how can I be confident that students learn this foundational these foundational concepts, right? This is a freshman class on which, the entire upper division CS curriculum is built. So if they don't get it here, they're going to really suffer later on. And, the remote education and COVID really raised concerns about kind of our traditional assessment methods. Am I going to be confident that if I assign them a grade, that grade reflects their understanding of the material? And these challenges, it's not new, right? They did exist pre-COVID. We're always kind of looking at how do we police cheating? How do we assess? How do we get students to demonstrate their knowledge on different concepts? But I think COVID definitely exacerbated the problem. All right, so I had a couple of motivating principles, right? Going into this semester, I sat down, I thought, what is it that really, really matters to me? And one thing was I decided I really want to emphasize core concepts, okay? I want to make sure that when they come out of this, that they are ready for the next class. And this meant streamlining my content, like get to the point and get there quickly. I also wanted to be confident in my assessment, that if they demonstrated, how am I going to get them to demonstrate knowledge of the content? And I also still, even with, the remote environment, still believe that self-directed learning and creativity are important in education, that learning should be fun. And that if we can have components in our class, like projects where students get to do their own work, this is a way to reinforce basic skills and also learn material that's not covered directly in the class. Okay, so I had 3 kind of motivating ideas that were guiding what I did. So what did I do then to implement these ideas? So for emphasizing core concepts, I changed my assignments in my lectures. I did what's called a spiral approach to education, where I would bring back concepts from earlier assignments. Okay, so by the time we had regular weekly assignments in this class. So by the time we got to assignment 3 or 4, I was covering things again, or including things again that they had seen in like assignment 1 or 2. And then as we went on, the ideas would come back in a slightly modified way. What this meant was that I had to change how I presented my assignments. In previous semesters, I would ask them to do just a lot of coding. I mean, this is a programming class, and so there would be some extraneous coding in their assignments that would have to be done. I removed it. I just got rid of all of it so that I could do this kind of spiraling. The other thing that I did was I changed how I did exams. And this was something that I had done previously in lower division classes, but did it to a greater degree this semester, where I had 4 exams. And if a student did not get a satisfactory grade on the exam, I just gave them a 0 and said, I will set you up with a retake. Okay, so I'm not going to mess around with partial credit and maybe you almost passed. If it's below satisfactory, I'm going to give you 0. I want you to go and take a look at your exam, continue working on it, finish the problem, come back and tell me what you did. And then I'll give you a second exam that you can do as a retake. And then I also did this end of semester self-directed project. And this project, I think, was actually one of the more successful things that I did, or actually I say gave me a lot of confidence that the other things I had done in the semester had actually worked. All right, so what is this project? I call it the Create Your Own Project, where I provide, and I have done this before, where I provide a basic set of technical requirements. And then the students have to come up with a project that meets those basic requirements, all right? And again, this is all programming. I did this in this class this semester with 35 students. I've also used this approach in other lower division classes where I had a few hundred students. So it is definitely more management in those larger classes, but can still be done. So just as an example, and I know that we have people with a bunch of different backgrounds here on the call, and so this may not make a whole lot of sense, but so the technical requirements were things like contains at least 2 data structures that we studied this semester, or at least one that we studied and one that we didn't. Okay, so as long as you've met those technical requirements, you have a satisfactory project. one of your classes should contain at least 10 public methods. You have to have a well-documented driver file. And then there are some other things too about how code has to be structured so that it would be good form. But basically I'm telling them like, hey, this is your requirements. Beyond that, it is up to you what you do. All right, so there's three things I think I did. Why do I say this semester was a success? Okay, what is my evidence? Why do I believe it worked? What I saw over the semester was that assignment performance improved for some students who struggled initially. All right, so students who may have initially struggled to get their code working on linked lists, for example, later on were able to implement those concepts. I also found that exam performance improved on the retakes for all students. Okay, so for everybody who failed their exam initially, when they went back and reworked their code and then did the retake, they passed 100% of the time. Okay, so this gave me confidence that they did understand the material. And then finally, the project performance really exceeded my expectations. That, you know, I think remote was still difficult. It's difficult to gauge where students are, right? Without being in the class every day, without seeing their facial expressions, without hearing the tone of their voice, it's hard to know. Like even seeing their grades, it was still hard to know how they were doing. And so I was initially apprehensive about how the project was going to go. You know, I just wasn't sure. But what I found was that students would come to office hours and they would talk about their projects with a tremendous amount of confidence. They would show me what they were doing. They would ask questions. We could walk through their code. We could debug the problems that they were having. They could be confident in their work. It also provided me with an additional check-in, right? I could go and look at the project that they submitted and know this was their own work. And I could see whether or not they understood the concepts that we were doing. I also had a lot of positive student reaction. I heard from a number of students that they really appreciated having the flexibility and the openness to explore something that they were interested in. And as far as the minimum technical requirements, they always go way beyond, right? The projects that students submit, once they get in, they start working, the minimum bar, they will jump over that bar by leaps and bounds. All right, I see that I am out of time. I do have details about how to actually implement this idea of a project. I will be in the breakout room and can definitely answer a lot of questions at that time. All right, so thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rhonda. The notion of using projects that students really owned, the create your own project, wonderful. Okay, I want to keep moving us along. I'm turning now to our breakout panelist leaders. Each of them have a few minutes just to introduce their topic, and then we're going to move to the breakout rooms. So, Murray, let me move to you right away. Go ahead.
You got it. Thank you. I don't think I've met everyone here. I'm Murray Cox. I'm a mathematician, but I have a background in education, so I have a huge interest in hearing everyone's pedagogical methods and the metrics that you use to assess students this semester. So I'm going to talk about our experience last semester, or I want to hear you talk about, rather, our concerns for engagement on Zoom. I want to hear about the different methods that we used, that you're planning on using this semester. And as I think Rhonda and some others have mentioned, we all teach different students at different maturity levels, different topics. We use different methods. We all have different personalities. We teach classes of different sizes. Maybe it's a group of 5 in a research group, or it's an intro level class with 1,200 students. So engagement is going to have a lot of different forms in how it looks. The goal of our breakout discussion is going to be to address basically the general concept of engagement. What does it look like in this COVID milieu that we're all now part of? I was reminded of a story, if you can let me go off just a little bit, about Hebrew laborers in ancient Egypt, where the Pharaoh at that time retaliated against a worker uprising by proclaiming that from this day forward, all the workers are required to make bricks without straw. That is, they needed to get that very vital brick ingredient for themselves. It was no longer going to be provided for them, and there was no reduction in brick quota. So the job was getting harder, and simultaneously the assistance was being reduced. And I thought, man, this sounds familiar. I don't know if you know a group of people who received a pay cut and then were handed a harder workload and then asked to do so with less straw and less graduate help. So our current directive is to inspire and engage the students. And oh, by the way, you have to do this without personal contact. That's no longer going to be provided for you. So I want to know the difficulty that you've experienced, because any job, the difficulty is dependent upon the tools and the material that you get to work with. So how have you been engaging students without seeing them? Do you think the students are motivated when they aren't visibly being held accountable? As an example, on Christmas morning, my toddler got a new toy train. Now, there's two ways to think of this. Ideally, the train should come with batteries and be pre-programmed to move in little motions and make whistles and stuff. Or it could be that I'm supposed to install the batteries and I'm supposed to code the train to do certain things. Now, the moment the present is opened, both of those opinions are really a secondary issue, because either way, it's Christmas morning. And the bottom line is, at that moment, the train is not fun unless or until it's powered and programmed. Similarly, when we get a student, where does their curiosity and passion and optimism come from? Do these things ideally come as part of the package when we get the new student? Or are we supposed to instill this in the student when we interact with them? Either way, come January 14, genuine quality teaching and learning is not going to happen at that moment unless or until that student is engaged. And the issue is, I know that some students come with batteries and some don't. So philosophically, I was thinking, if I give the best, most interesting, most informational lecture ever created in the history of lectures, and I gave this presentation to an empty computer screen, then what did I just do? Did I teach? What if there is a student who heard my lecture on the other end of Zoom? Then did learning occur? I'd still say not necessarily. Effective communication involves engagement from both parties. And if the student and the professor are not fully involved, then we're both fooling ourselves about what just happened during our scheduled interaction time. But then the pessimist in me speaks up and goes, wait a minute, isn't engagement ultimately the student's decision? I mean, I'm not teaching a bunch of 5-year-old children, and I'm not entertaining a pack of monkeys here. This is a CU Boulder level of education. We have programs in the top 10 in the nation. Aren't these students supposed to arrive with batteries installed? Well, I would finish by saying, I think that teaching an unengaged student is at best a performance, and it's witnessed by uninterested passersby, maybe like you're walking down Pearl Street and you see the guy juggling and you've got no interest in this, but you dare not look in that direction, or they're going to say, hey, put $1 in my hat. I think the uninterested student is not going to make themselves available via Zoom. They don't want to put $1 in the hat. So the questions we're going to discuss are basically, where does engagement come from? And how do I create the engaged class? And that's our discussion.
Excellent. Excellent. Great follow on Rhonda's talk. Ariel, you're going to lead a breakout session on project-based learning. Please introduce it. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. My name is Ariel Hein. I am the Director of Undergraduate Programs in Atlas. And our curriculum has always been extremely interdisciplinary and project-based. So a lot of the ideas that I want to share have been learned over many years, but there's a lot of specific tools and techniques that we've learned over the last 10 months that have really helped to make project-based teaching and learning in this remote format really successful. I think overall, one of the huge advantages of project-based learning, and kind of builds off of what Rhonda presented, is that it's an opportunity for students to take the content in the course and make it personal to them, which brings a whole new level of meaning to what they're learning. One of the things that's been especially successful is documentation of projects. So really building in a practice of reflecting on the work that's being created, and then sort of the steps along the way to move from an idea into a final form. And again, we work with many different kinds of content and materials. So I really do think this this approach to documentation has a value across many different disciplines, and it's a chance to really think about how you're learning, why you're learning, and then ultimately what you can do with it in your own kind of way. And I know that there's a lot of arguments against project-based learning in terms of projects can take away from individual lessons, or there's difficulty in assessing it. And this kind of method of documentation and reflection that we use really heavily has been a great resource for providing ways to assess and also build in additional kind of methods for evaluation within those projects. So I'll share some details on how that's worked, but also specifically tools for how to do this well. Like there's just many online resources, both for presenting work, for documenting work, and I have just a lot of examples that I can kind of show what that looks like. I think something that's so important is really building into the curriculum how to talk about work and how to communicate about the work, not only to produce interesting and compelling projects, but also then to think about how do you share those, how do you get those ideas out. So that's one of the kind of big focuses. And again, I think it really connects to engagement, giving the students kind of ownership of how they're learning and what they're learning, and then structures and support around that.
Wonderful, wonderful. These talks are building on each other. Now we're moving into clearly making space for project-based learning. Let me turn now to Rosie and Rosalinda and resilience.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to actually start by saying something that I didn't mean to say, which is one of the threads that I think informs resilience that already Rhonda, Anne-Marie, and Ariel have mentioned is this idea of giving students a sense of agency over what they're doing in the classroom and how they are taking charge of their own learning. And I'm a developmental and clinical neuroscientist, and I study how the brain changes mostly from the period of puberty into the mid-20s, which is actually still adolescence technically. So I've been interested for a long time in what's going on with college students and mental health. So as I think all of you are probably aware, we're in a mental health crisis on college campuses, and this was before the pandemic started. We were seeing rising rates of anxiety and depression. Suicide on campus is a growing and really pressing concern that we've all been trying to pay attention to. And then sort of this bomb went off, the coronavirus. And we worked with students last spring to talk to them about what impact this was having. And one of the things they expressed really consistently was this fear that because the coronavirus is this enormous, uncontrollable stressor, that they didn't have control over any other part of their life either. And William, I think the cartoon that you shared really showed that. It's sort of the wheels come off in one area and you feel like the wheels are coming off everywhere. And probably all of us had that experience at least once in the last year or two. So I think there's an opportunity here to recognize the humanity of our students. And the reason that they're not learning in the same way is not any fault of their own, really. The rug has been pulled out from underneath them in terms of the structure of their learning, the structure of their social connections. You know, once you're my age, you don't spend as much time with people who are your peers, right? If you have a family and little kids, you don't get to do anything fun anymore. But when you're in college, this is this important time for social development and for making this transition to independence. And all of a sudden, students lost all of that, right? So they lost their peer connections. They had to move back in with their parents. They had to socially isolate. They're having to learn. They're taking classes basically on a TV screen is what people told us. And they expressed a lot of fear about their own capacity to do well. You know, they didn't say, I don't care anymore. They said, I'm scared that I'm not going to be able to learn and I'm not going to be able to succeed. And there was all this fear that I think is still being carried around by a lot of students. So giving students agency in the classroom is one way to foster resilience for them. And I think the nice thing is mental health and well-being doesn't have to be sort of this separate thing that we put in a box and we don't think about like, ooh, mental health, that's a little scary or outside our wheelhouse. It's already in the classroom, and you're already doing things that buffer students' mental health and resilience. So I'm really excited to hear and learn more. I've already learned a few tips and tricks that I intend to try out myself in the coming semester. And I'm just really enthusiastic to hear what comes up in the breakout discussions.
Brilliant, brilliant. Agency fosters resilience. What a great progressive summation of where we've gotten to. Let me turn now to Chris Collier. Chris, you have 4 minutes, and then we're going to move into the breakout sessions. Let me just remind everybody too, each of these speakers is leading a breakout session. You'll have a chance to go into 2, but Chris, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, William. My name is Chris Kaler. I am the director of NASA's Colorado Space Grant Program in the College of Engineering. And I have been teaching in some form or another since 1995. And that surprises me, just to say, because when I was in high school and as a CU student, I was a very restless learner. And I'm very empathetic because of that, how to teach students, but I'm also now empathetic about what it's like to teach those students. And so being on this committee with William and everyone else, when we started getting to the student survey, I was that person that was trying to balance what the students were saying with the reality of what it's like to teach to those students in this new world. I struggled. We all probably had our struggles when we were students ourselves, but I try to be empathetic about what it's like now to be in this virtual classroom. I mean, as a CU Boulder student in the 90s, I had the Colorado Daily, like every other student, sitting in the classroom with a newspaper, trying not to glance at the comics. Now these students have everything at their disposal. They have a window in front of them that they can close at any time. That has got to be a challenge. So everything we've talked about here today so far, we're going to, what does not fall into what was just discussed is going to fall into this general discussion. But before I stop talking, my litmus test, or whatever the best way to say that is, in this whole build-up to this event has been to place that one of those students that spoke in that survey in the audience of this symposium and have them think or examine, one, did we hear them? And two, are we actively trying to address the things we learned? 560 some students sent us feedback, and we want to make sure that we're hearing them and that we're meeting them in some way. So in my mind, after looking at all that, I know that we as instructors, those here today, we want to teach. We have a passion for teaching. Those in our classrooms also want to learn from us what we have to teach them. So I think we have just this disconnect in this new world, and how do we reconnect those people? And to me, it boils down to one simple thing, and that's acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that we care, that we hear them, and that we're going to work together to work in this new reality. So in my breakout session, we are going to talk about how you can come to some clear understanding with your students. And so basically what it boils down to is they know what to expect from me as an instructor, as from you, from an instructor at the very first day of class. And they know what we expect of them, that one, this is a real class. We're going to hold you to the same standards of everyone else that's been before you. And then we set that boundary at the beginning. And from there, we have this new space to learn that everyone understands. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about in the general session and wherever else we go.
Brilliant, brilliant. What an incredible example of Rhonda's spiraling approach, in that you brought us back to Jem's point about clarity in guidance between the instructor and the student. And Chris, you've also wonderfully made us think about how the instructor is also facing these issues and these issues of distraction. Excellent. I'd like to take a few minutes to accomplish 3 things. I have two concluding remarks I wanted to make. But before I do that, I just wanted to open it up overall. What are people thinking? What has struck people? What needs to be marked at the end of our 90 minutes together? Someone jump in.
So I wonder if we can have some kind of open forum, and I apologize if you've already got this going, William, and I'm just, I missed it. But if there's an open forum throughout the semester where we can just go and say, hey, does anybody know how to do this? Or I'm planning, for example, I have some technique that I use in person with students in conference, and I realize now that there are some web resources that'll help me do that on Zoom, and I didn't know anything about those. So some forum where we can actually explicitly ask questions that other people can answer about teaching.
So I am very interested in whether there is sustained interest in some kind of college open forum, both for intellectual discussion and for technical focusing. And I would be willing to organize that if there was interest. So please, is there interest?
There is interest.
Yes.
Great. I am happy to work on that, and I think I could probably dragoon a few members of my stalwart group 5 into it. I think it's important. I don't want to do it if there's no real interest, but we can always give it a shot.
We have in mechanical engineering, and not everybody's bought into it yet, but we do have and I know people are saying Slack or Teams on the chat, but we use Slack in mechanical, and some people are on it, and we've shared ideas about pedagogy and, diversity, equity, inclusion, and a lot of other things there. And I think that if we had a critical mass there, it would be really, really useful. And I think the same thing could go for the college. I think the challenge is that in the chat now, we have Slack, Teams, and Discord. And I think that you'd have to find a platform that most people use, because I hate Teams as an example. No offense to the people that said Teams. I'm just not comfortable using it, but I use Slack all the time, but I think other people are on the other side of the fence. So I think having something that would be kind of ubiquitous and usable just to have discussions and open channels and conversations would be really helpful.
Great. I think that, a college-wide Slack or something like that seems overwhelming to me, but department-focused Slack or department-focused ongoing conversation seems to me very interesting. And I don't know if Rhonda is on this call, but maybe Rhonda and I could follow up on that and talk about it, because it seems to me that there are different levels of this conversation. There's kind of an overall, hey, what tools have you discovered? What's working and what are you having trouble with? And then there's really department conversations that strike me as tremendously hard and important.
So William, I think the value I'm finding here is that I do have conversations with the people in my local unit, but I don't hear the ideas that are coming from across the college. And that is actually the thing that I'm really lacking. So I'd encourage you to think about something bigger, more terrifying, more global. And of course, within Slack, you can create channels for departmental conversations. So if you had something that people could dip into, that would be really great.
All right, well, I'm hearing that loud and clear. I'm seeing it in capitals in the chat. So much appreciated. So other thoughts that came out of this discussion. Someone just be bold, jump in.
It was good to see how much everyone cares about teaching and wants to do a good job. We have a great teaching community here in engineering. So lots, a great network to have and to build on. And that was very pleasing to see. Also, I liked seeing the support for student-centric ideas in the discussions that I attended. So how do we enable students to have agency and ownership and be resilient while also getting our job of teaching done and meeting our standards and getting everything that we want accomplished in a class done while still holding the students very much in view.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you.
So in the latest chat breakout room, there was a kind of a theme about addressing the questions that aren't asked, or the students, who are, not coming to you with like questions about, oh, can you extend this deadline? But the students who aren't coming to you with those, they may be the most vulnerable, maybe the least resilient. And so, one of the things is, things that I'll take moving forward is to provide alternative options for students who do ask for a deadline extension, because maybe it's not the deadline extension that they really need, but maybe they need a referral to therapy or invitation to office hours, or something else like that. So it's thinking about like the unasked questions, or the
Really nicely said. Really nicely said. And how do we communicate to them why we are interested? How do we, in the conversation I was in, we talked a little bit about being explicit about why we were teaching the way we were teaching, and using that to try and get at students who maybe haven't thought about communicating at all, and therefore are putting themselves in a disengaged place. Other big thoughts from people.
This is maybe a small thought, but I just like seeing people again. Like I mean, I see
one
a lot, and yeah, I see my students a lot, and we have conferences and all this other stuff. But I mean, it is really just great to see you. I miss seeing you all. I miss just walking down in the lobby and waving to you and knowing that you're still on the planet, and just hi.
So on that note, I want to wrap us up with two final slides. And I thank you for just enduring this. One is, this was written in the student survey. So lest we think that the students are entirely negative and are all overwhelmed, one student wrote, "The online format is incredible. The potential to transform the student experience is immense. A few classes have highlighted this fact. The single biggest barrier to some classes being effective is the idea that they should hold the same constraints of the in-person class." I think that is a brilliant observation, because we tend to think of remote learning, synchronous remote learning, and online learning in general as trying to mimic the ideal seminar, the ideal lecture. But friends, we have entered into a new world, and we have been thrown into it like castaways. David Bowie's Major Tom, floating out in this new world. And the constraints are utterly different. So what I say first is, we need to experiment, and we need to be explicit about why we are experimenting. We need to think about what we might do in this new world, how we might reach students and engage them in a new way, how we might spiral forward. It brings us back to that strange equilibrium. And the equilibrium of online learning is fundamentally a different equilibrium than the equilibrium we're used to, but we're in it now. So in that equilibrium, I want to close with one final cartoon. And this was by a student named Grace Gann. And the prompt I gave them was to come up with a cartoon about American descent. This was at the beginning of the semester, and we were witnessing a lot of civil unrest. So I asked them to cartoon about it. And Grace wrote, "When your attention is treated as a commodity, rebellion can be as simple as stopping to smell the roses." And I've thought about this a lot. I think it's a beautiful cartoon, and Grace is kind of an expert with the gray marker. I'm just stunned at the way she can bring shapes out. But what this makes me think in our context is that I know that I perceive the semester as a headlong march through material. I have to cover the canon and I have to get through my lessons. But what Grace reminds me here is that stopping and taking time is a powerful form of engagement. It is a mode of agency to stop and let students think, let them find their way. And more than that, to explain that stopping and thinking and working through a project and having enthusiasm for that project and sharing that enthusiasm is a mode of engagement that is in many ways stronger than the forced march through the curriculum. So I wanted to end us today by asking you all to think about the power of slowing down your curriculum and making space for students to engage around projects in order to find their agency and their voice. Rosalinda reminded us that resilience is connected to agency. If we give our students room to be this young person in this picture, to stop and to smell the roses here are knowledge itself, then we will have done well. Thank you all for joining us. I'm so glad to have seen you all. I have gotten a strong message that my next task is to formulate some college-wide discussions, and I promise you I will. Onwards, friends, onwards.